"By spring, you will birth our son," the Amish man ordered to the poor obese girl. A poor, ridiculed girl stands trembling in the snow as the church bell tolls. Before the gathered congregation, the bishop declares she will wed a hardened Amish. Convert that by spring she will bear his son. But this is no tender blessing. It's a public command meant to save her from eviction, but sealing her fate with a stranger. At first, he swears to protect her honor. Yet, when the railroad comes for her land, their fragile union becomes a fight for survival. Corrupt men, missing deeds, and whispers of betrayal threaten to tear everything away. In a world where greed rules the courts and shame silences the weak, only faith and love can stand against the storm. But can a broken gunslinger and a humiliated girl turn a cruel order into a blessing, or will spring bring ruin instead of new life? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The meeting house's wooden walls creaked against the mounting snowdrifts outside. Hazel Stoltzfus hunched her shoulders, trying to make herself smaller in the back row of the women's section. The familiar scents of pine wood and lamp oil usually brought her comfort during Sunday service, but today they seemed to close in around her like a trap. Her thick fingers worried at the hem of her black apron as Bishop Lapp's stern voice cut through the quiet. Hazel Stoltzfus. The sound of her name made her stomach clench. She kept her eyes fixed on her worn boots while whispers rippled through the congregation like wind through wheat. 60 pairs of eyes turned toward her, and she felt the weight of each stare. "Stand," Bishop Lapp commanded. Hazel's legs trembled as she rose. Her plain dress, mended multiple times, stretched tight across her broad frame. A few young girls whispered behind their hands, and she caught the word "fat" before their mothers shushed them. "The community has discussed your situation, Bishop." Lapp continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the meeting house. "Your father's land cannot go untended, and you cannot manage alone." Hazel's cheeks burned. She didn't dare look up, knowing she'd see the mixture of pity and judgment on the faces of her neighbors. The floorboards beneath her feet became a blur as tears threatened to spill. "Aiden Keating." The bishop's voice shifted direction. From the men's section, a tall figure rose. Hazel knew who he was without looking. The convert, the former gunslinger, who'd arrived 6 months ago seeking a new life among the plain folk. His reputation preceded him. Years of violence, now buried beneath modest clothing, and a commitment to peace. "You will marry Hazel Stoltzfus," Bishop Lapp declared. "By spring, you will birth our son." The words fell like stones in still water. Someone coughed. A baby fussed. Hazel's face flamed hotter, and she squeezed her eyes shut against the shame of it all. This wasn't how she dreamed of her marriage announcement. Not as a command. Not as a solution to a problem, and certainly not to a man with blood on his hands. She dared a glance at Aiden Keating. He stood straight-backed, his face composed. Beneath his thick beard, eyes downcast in submission to the bishop's authority. His huge hands, calloused from months of honest work, were clasped before him. Not a flicker of emotion crossed his weathered features. "Sit," Bishop Lapp ordered, and they both sank back to their seats. The rest of the service passed in a blur. Hymns were sung, prayers were offered, but Hazel heard none of it. Her mind spun with the reality of her situation, married to a stranger, expected to bear his child. All because she couldn't manage her father's land alone. When the service ended, Hazel hurried out before anyone could speak to her. The snow had picked up, and she pulled her worn shawl tight around her shoulders for the walk home. Behind her, she heard the murmurs of the congregation, knew they were talking about her. About the match that would bind the poor, heavy-set spinster to the reformed gunslinger. Her cabin stood silent and cold when she arrived. She lit the lamp with shaking hands and stirred the banked fire back to life. The simple supper she prepared that morning bread, cheese, and cold meat, sat untouched as she stared into the flames. Through her window, she could see Aiden Keating at work across the lane. Snow swirled around him as he split logs with powerful, practiced strokes. His breath came out in steamy clouds in the frigid air. The steady thunk of his axe echoed across the space between them, a space that would soon vanish when they shared a home. She watched him work until dusk settled. Noting how he never paused, never looked up, just steadily chopped wood as if it could absolve him of his past sins. Perhaps that's what this marriage would be, penance for them both. Her, for being unable to manage alone. Him, for the violence that marked his earlier life. The lamp's flame flickered, casting shadows on her cabin's walls. Tomorrow, she knew, the preparations would begin. There would be a wedding to plan, however simple. There would be decisions about which cabin they would share, how to combine their meager possessions, how to live together as husband and wife, though they were strangers. Hazel's hands trembled as she finally forced herself to eat a few bites of her cold supper. Across the lane, Aiden's axe fell silent as darkness claimed the day. She heard his heavy footsteps crunching through the snow as he gathered the split wood. Then the sound of his cabin door closing. They were separated by a lane of snow tonight. But soon they would be bound together by the bishop's command and God's law. Hazel touched her wet cheeks, surprised to find tears there. Whether they were from fear, shame, or something else entirely, she couldn't say. Morning arrived with bitter winds that rattled the cabin's shutters. Hazel wrapped her thickest shawl around her shoulders and gripped the wooden water bucket, its handle smooth from years of use. Her boots crunched through fresh snow as she made her way toward the creek. Keeping her eyes fixed on the path ahead, two neighbor women stood near the miller's fence, their heads bent close together. Their whispers carried on the crisp air. Poor Aiden Keating, saddled with such a burden she can barely fit through her own door. Hazel's cheeks burned despite the cold. She clutched the bucket tighter and quickened her pace, but her size made swift movement difficult. The women's words followed her like shadows down the snowy path at the creek. Ice had formed along the banks, leaving only a narrow channel of flowing water in the middle. Hazel's boots slipped slightly on the frozen ground as she made her way down the slope. The bucket felt heavier with each step, though it was still empty. Heavy footsteps crunched in the snow behind her. She tensed, knowing without turning that it was Aiden Keating. His tall shadow fell across the ice beside her. "Let me help with that, Miss Stoltzfus." His voice was quiet, gentle even. Nothing like what she'd imagined a former gunslinger would sound like. Hazel clutched the bucket closer. "I can manage. I know you can." He stepped carefully onto the ice beside her. "But you shouldn't have to manage alone anymore." His words hung in the frozen air between them. Hazel risked a glance up at him. His face was weathered, beard neatly trimmed according to Amish custom, but his eyes held none of the mockery or pity she'd grown used to seeing. "The bucket gets heavy on the way back," he continued softly, "and the path is treacherous with ice." After a moment's hesitation, Hazel handed him the bucket. He moved with surprising grace for such a large man, breaking through the thin ice at the creek's edge to fill the container. "Miss Stoltzfus," he said, straightening up with the full bucket, "I need to speak plain with you." Hazel braced herself for whatever shame might come next, but Aiden's next words surprised her. "I never meant to bring embarrassment to you yesterday. The bishop approached me about this marriage last week." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "He told me about the threat of eviction, about how the deacons wanted to divide your father's land among other families." The cold air stung Hazel's eyes. Or perhaps it was tears. "They think I can't manage it alone." "They're wrong about that," Aiden said firmly. "I've watched you work that land these past months. But they're determined to take it unless you marry." He shifted the heavy bucket to his other hand. "I saw a chance to help someone in need. And maybe he looked down at his free hand, flexing. Fingers that had once held weapons. Maybe a chance to prove I can be something other than what I was. Hazel studied the frozen creek, processing his words. The bishop said, "We must have a child by spring." Spring. "I make you this vow, Miss Stoltzfus." Tisa's voice dropped lower, meant for her ears alone. "I will never force anything upon you. Not ever. Marriage or no marriage, you'll have my protection and respect. I aim to help build your dignity, not destroy it." Something small and warm flickered in Hazel's chest, like a candle flame catching in the dark. She'd expected cruelty or at best indifference from this arranged marriage. Kindness was altogether foreign. "We should get this water back before it freezes," Aiden said, already starting up the slippery bank. He moved carefully, making sure his footing was secure before each step. That evening, Hazel found herself setting 2 places at her small table. Aiden arrived precisely at supper time, stamping snow from his boots outside before entering. He'd brought a fresh loaf of bread from the community baker. They ate mostly in silence, the lamp casting warm light over the simple meal. It was awkward, this new arrangement, but not entirely uncomfortable. Aiden handled his cup and plate carefully, his large hands surprisingly gentle with her mother's old china, as the lamplight began to fade and Aiden prepared to leave. Hazel found her voice. "Thank you," she said softly, "for the bread. And for your words at the creek." He paused at the door, his broad shoulders filling the frame. "Good night, Miss Stoltzfus." The door closed quietly behind him. Hazel stood at her window, watching his figure disappear into the gathering darkness. The day's events turned in her mind like leaves in a stream. She'd expected her future to be cruel, a loveless arrangement born of necessity and shame. But Aiden's gentle offer to carry her water, his promise of respect, his understanding of her dignity, these small kindnesses planted a tiny seed of hope in her heart. Perhaps life with Aiden Keating would not be the punishment she had feared. 3. Days after their talk at the creek, Hazel and Aiden worked together in the crisp morning air. Their breath formed clouds as they hauled fresh hay from the storage barn to feed her father's old milk cow. The routine had already become familiar. Aiden would fork the hay onto the wooden sledge while Hazel secured it with rope. "She's a good cow," Hazel said softly, patting the animal's broad flank. "Papa always said Betsy gave the sweetest milk in the county." Aiden nodded, his strong arms lifting another forkful. "She's well cared for. Anyone can see that." The thud of hoofbeats interrupted their work. A rider on a gleaming bay horse galloped into the yard, his fine wool coat and polished boots marking him as an outsider. The man reined his horse to a stop, sending snow flying. "Miss Stoltzfus." His voice carried the sharp edge of authority. When Hazel nodded, he pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I represent the Western Railroad Company. I'm here to deliver formal notice regarding this property." Hazel's hands trembled as she took the document. The cow shifted nervously beside her, sensing her distress. "According to our surveys and new depot plans, this land falls within railroad territory," the man continued. "Our records show no valid deed of ownership." "That's not possible," Hazel protested, her voice thin against the winter wind. "This was my father's land. He worked it for 20 years. The agent's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Less you can. Produce proper documentation by spring, you'll be required to vacate. The railroad's expansion can't be delayed by unsubstantiated claims." His gaze swept dismissively over Hazel's plain dress and Aiden's work clothes. Aiden stepped forward, his height matching the mounted agent. "We'll need time to gather our proof. You have until the first thaw." The agent gathered his reins. "Though I doubt you'll find anything. Good day." He wheeled his horse around and galloped away, leaving them standing in the churned snow. Hazel's legs went weak. She stumbled backward until her shoulder met the barn wall. The notice crumpled in her grip. "Steady now," Aiden said softly. He took the paper from her trembling fingers and smoothed it open. His eyes narrowed as he read. "Papa always said the land was ours," Hazel whispered. "He showed me the deed once when I was small. Said it was our anchor in this world." Aiden carefully folded the notice and tucked it into his coat. "Let's finish with Betsy. Then we'll talk." They completed their chores in tense silence. The cow seemed to sense their worry, pressing her warm bulk against Hazel as they led her back to the barn. By the time they finished, the short winter day was fading. "Come to my cabin," Hazel said suddenly. "I'll build up the fire. We need to discuss this." Inside, Hazel stirred the embers and added fresh logs while Aiden removed his boots at the door. Soon, flames danced in the hearth, casting warm light across the simple room. They sat in the 2 wooden chairs Hazel's father had made years ago. "Tell me about the deed," Aiden said gently. Tears welled in Hazel's eyes. "Papa kept it in his Bible, along with Mama's wedding papers and my birth record." She wiped her cheeks with her apron. "After he died last winter, I searched everywhere. Bible was there, but the papers were gone. I thought perhaps the deacons had taken them for safekeeping, but when I asked, she shook her head. They said they knew nothing about it." Aiden leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Your father was a careful man. He wouldn't have lost something so important." "The railroad man acted like he knew there was no deed," Hazel said. "Like he was sure we couldn't prove anything. Makes me wonder if someone's been paid to make papers disappear." Aiden's voice held a hard edge. Fresh tears spilled down Hazel's cheeks. "What will we do?" "Without the land," her voice broke. Aiden reached across the space between them and took her hand. His grip was warm, steady as the ground beneath them. "We'll search until we find it. Every inch of this cabin, the barn, anywhere your father might have hidden something precious. You believe me? About the deed. I believe in your father's wisdom, and I believe in you." His thumb traced a gentle circle on her palm. "We'll fight this, Hazel, together." She looked down at their joined hands, his large and weathered, hers, soft from working dough and butter. A sob escaped her throat, but this time it carried relief along with fear. For the first time since her father's death, she didn't feel alone against the world's storms. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting their shadows on the cabin wall. 2 figures leaning toward each other, connected by clasped hands and a shared purpose. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside, Hazel felt the first spark of real hope warm her heart. Dawn painted the cabin walls in pale gold as Hazel and Aiden knelt beside her father's old oak trunk. The brass clasps creaked as Hazel lifted the heavy lid, releasing the familiar scent of cedar and aged paper. Her throat tightened at the sight of her father's belongings: his Sunday hat, carefully folded handkerchiefs, and stacks of well-worn books. "Papa kept everything organized," Hazel explained, lifting out a leather-bound hymnal. "He was particular about his papers." Aiden nodded, handling each item with respect. "My kind of man. Methodical." They worked in comfortable silence, examining every page of every book, checking between bindings and covers. Hazel's fingers trembled as she opened her father's Bible. But like before, the precious documents were missing from their usual place. He had a way of tucking important things inside. "Books," Hazel said, reaching for another volume. Said books were the safest place for treasures, since most folks don't bother reading them. Smart thinking. Aiden carefully shook each book, watching for loose pages. "We'll go through every one." By mid-morning, they had searched dozens of books without success. Hazel sat back on her heels, dust motes dancing in the sunlight around her. "We need supplies from town. Flour's running low, and the lamp oil won't last another night." "I'll come with you," Aiden said, rising and offering his hand to help her up. We can continue searching when we return. The walk to town took them past bare apple trees and snow-covered fields. Hazel's heavy black coat wrapped her against the winter chill, while Aiden's longer stride matched her shorter steps. The mercantile's bell chimed as they entered, warmth and the smell of coffee greeting them. While Hazel selected flour, Aiden moved to the oil barrels at the back. 3 men lounged near the pot-bellied stove, their laughter carrying across the store. "Well, if it ain't the gunslinger turned peaceful," one called out. "Must have drawn the short straw in the marriage lottery." Another man chuckled. "Reckon he needs a bigger wagon just to haul her home." Hazel's cheeks burned as she kept her eyes fixed on the flour barrel, measuring cups falling from trembling fingers. She heard heavy boots approach behind her. Aiden's body went rigid, his hands curling into tight fists at his sides. The old instinct rose in him, the urge to silence mockery with violence, to defend honor with force. His nails dug deep into his palms until blood welled in half-moon curves. But he remembered his vows, remembered the peace he'd found in faith. Without a word, he turned away from the men and walked to Hazel's side. "Let me carry that flour for you," he said softly. The men's taunts followed them to the counter, where Mr. Miller rang up their purchases with an apologetic glance. Aiden paid, his movements deliberate and controlled, though a muscle jumped in his jaw. Outside, Hazel noticed bright red crescents marking Aiden's palms. "You're bleeding," she said quietly. "Better my own blood than theirs." His voice was rough with contained emotion. "I made promises. To God. To you." Hazel's heart squeezed at the sight of his wounded hands, at the cost of his restraint. She pulled her handkerchief from her pocket and pressed it gently to his palm. "Thank you," she whispered, "for choosing peace." Their eyes met, something warm and understanding passing between them. Aiden's fingers curled carefully around the handkerchief, brushing hers. That evening, they shared a simple supper of bread and stew. The lamp cast soft shadows across the table as they ate, comfortable in the quiet. Hazel found her gaze drawn to Aiden's face, the strong line of his jaw, the gentle way he broke his bread despite his calloused hands. When he looked up, their eyes held longer than before, neither rushing to look away. "We'll start fresh tomorrow," Aiden said, helping clear the dishes. "Your father was wise to hide things in books. We just need to look closer." Hazel nodded, warming at his use of we. The mockery from town still stung, but it was soothed by the memory of Aiden's quiet strength, his chosen path of peace. Perhaps her father had been right about another thing, that true worth was measured not in fists raised, but in fists unclenched. As they finished cleaning up, their movements fell into an easy rhythm, as if they'd shared this kitchen for years instead of days. Neither mentioned how their hands sometimes brushed while passing plates, or how their glances lingered in the lamplight. Some things, Hazel thought, were better felt than spoken. 2 days of heavy snow draped the countryside in pristine white. Inside Hazel's cabin, warmth and the sweet scent of baking bread filled the air. Her strong hands worked the dough with practiced movements, pushing and folding until it felt just right beneath her fingers. Through the frosted window, she watched Aiden's steady rhythm with the axe, his breath clouding in the winter air as he split logs for their woodpile. The sound of chopping had become familiar now, almost comforting. Like the crackle of the hearth and the whisper of her prayers, it marked the passing of their days together. Hazel found herself humming hymns as she worked, her voice carrying softly through the cabin. When Aiden came in to warm himself, he moved naturally around her kitchen, careful not to disturb her routine, but present in a way that made the space feel less lonely. He knew now where she kept the cups, how she liked the kindling stacked, which floorboards creaked under heavy steps. One morning, as fresh snow drifted past the windows, a knock echoed through the cabin. Hazel looked up from her kneading flour, dusting her apron. Aiden moved to answer, his stockinged feet silent on the wooden floors. Their visitor was Nantan, wrapped in a thick wool blanket against the cold. Steam rose from his breath as he offered a wrapped package. "Venison," he said, his dark eyes warm with friendship. "The hunt was good yesterday." Aiden welcomed him inside, where the fire's heat quickly melted snow from Nantan's boots. "Much obliged," he said, taking the meat. "Won't you sit?" Nantan settled into a chair, his movements fluid and graceful. "I heard about the trouble at the mercantile," he said, looking at Aiden. "You chose wisdom over pride. Such restraint builds bridges between peoples." Hazel, who had been hanging back shyly, gathered her courage and approached with a plate of fresh bread, still warm from the oven. Nantan accepted it with a respectful nod that made her feel suddenly taller. "The railroad men," Nantan continued, breaking off a piece of bread. "They come with papers and promises. But papers have a way of vanishing when tracks need laying." His voice held old pain. "Many families, not just yours, have lost land this way." Hazel settled into her rocking chair, hands folded in her lap. "Papa was so careful with the deed. He showed me where he kept it, right up until—" her voice trailed off. "I can help you search," Nantan offered. "I have seen how they work. These men who move boundaries with ink and lies. Sometimes old documents hide in unexpected places." Glanced at Aiden. "4 eyes are good. 6 eyes are better." "We would welcome the help," Aiden said, his voice rough with gratitude. They talked a while longer, Nantan sharing stories of other settlers who had faced similar challenges. When he rose to leave, the morning light had strengthened, making the snow gleam like diamonds. After Nantan's departure, Hazel stood at the window, watching his figure disappear into the white landscape. "I never thought we'd have friends like him," she said softly. "Someone who understands." Aiden moved to stand beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. "Having allies changes things," he agreed. "Makes the burden lighter." "I feel safer," Hazel admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Knowing you have people who trust you, who believe in your peace." Evening found them sharing supper by candlelight, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. The venison, stewed with winter vegetables, filled the cabin with savory warmth. Hazel had set the table with her mother's cherished plates, their faded flowers still beautiful in the gentle light. "Come spring," Aiden said, breaking the comfortable silence. "We could plant a kitchen garden, if you'd like." Hazel's hands stilled on her spoon. It was the first time either had spoken of plans beyond the immediate future. "I've always wanted to grow herbs," she offered carefully. "And maybe some flowers. Flowers would be nice." Aiden's. The voice was soft, matching the candlelight. "Bring some color to the yard." They spoke quietly then of small hopes. Strawberry plants along the fence, a new shelf for Hazel's preserves, maybe a better door for the root cellar. Simple dreams, but they felt solid somehow, shared across the table in the intimate glow of Quisk, and Quisk glow of the candles. The snow continued falling outside, but inside, something was slowly blooming, fragile as spring's first crocus, but just as determined to grow through winter's crust. The first hints of dawn hadn't yet touched the horizon when Hazel stirred from sleep. Moving quietly in the darkness, she made her way to the hearth where last night's embers still glowed faintly. Her mother's old German hymns rose softly from her lips as she added kindling, the familiar melodies warming her spirit like the growing flames warmed her hands. "Gott ist die Liebe," she hummed, her voice carrying through the stillness. The hymn spoke of God's endless love, a comfort she'd learned at her mother's knee. In the corner where he slept on his pallet, Aiden lay awake, listening. Each morning, her songs reached places in his heart he thought had died long ago. The gentle notes seemed to wash away some of the blood-stained memories that haunted him. Like spring rain cleaning winter's grime, when gray light finally crept. Through the windows, they shared a simple breakfast of porridge before tackling their task. Every hymnal from her father's collection lay spread across the tables, some bound in leather. Others just paper-covered songbooks worn soft with use. "Papa loved his music," Hazel said, carefully turning pages yellowed with age. He said, singing. Brought heaven closer to earth. Aiden handled each book with reverence, checking between pages and along bindings. "My ma used to say something similar," he offered quietly. Before she passed, they worked through the morning, but found nothing. Between the verses of Amazing Grace or tucked into Sweet Hour of Prayer. By noon, disappointment sat heavy in their hearts, but duty called them to town. Aiden hitched the horse to the sleigh while Hazel wrapped their eggs carefully in cloth. The winter air bit sharp and clean as they set out, runners cutting smooth, tracks through fresh snow. Mountains rose around them like silent guardians, their peaks lost in low clouds. The delivery went quick enough, though Hazel noticed Aiden's shoulders tensing as they passed the mercantile. But no cruel words followed them today, and soon they were heading home. The late afternoon sun painting long blue shadows across the snow. Hazel found herself watching the landscape, marveling at how the blanket of white transformed everything, familiar, into something magical. Pine boughs drooped under their heavy burden, creating archways of crystalline white. "It's like God painted everything new," she whispered, then blushed at speaking such fanciful thoughts aloud. But Aiden didn't laugh. "Reminds me of that verse about sins white as snow," he said, his voice thoughtful. The horse's steady pace and the gentle sway of the sleigh created a pocket of peace around them. Perhaps that's what gave Hazel courage to speak what lay heavy on her heart. "I used to dream about having a family of my own," she admitted, eyes fixed on her mittened hands. "A home filled with children's laughter, maybe a garden out back." Her voice grew smaller. "But folks made it clear no man would want someone like me." Aiden's hands tightened on the reins, but his voice stayed gentle. "The good book says God's mercies are new every morning," he said slowly, choosing his words with care. "Reckon that means yesterday's hurts don't have to define tomorrow's blessings." Hazel felt tears freeze on her cheeks, but they weren't entirely sad ones. Evening found them in the warm cabin, the lamp casting a gentle glow. Hazel sat in her rocker, mending a tear in Aiden's work shirt. Her stitches were small and neat, each one a tiny act of care. Across from her, Aiden worked on her worn shoes, his large hands surprisingly delicate as he repaired the loose sole. The quiet between them felt different, now comfortable, like a well-worn quilt. Hazel caught herself humming again. And this time, Aiden's deep voice joined in softly on the chorus he'd learned from listening. The harmony wasn't perfect, but it filled the cabin with something that felt remarkably like hope. When their eyes met over their work, neither looked away quite so quickly anymore. Something was growing between them, as subtle as spring thaw, but just as unstoppable. Neither spoke of it directly, but they felt it in the way they moved around each other, in the small kindnesses they traded like precious gifts. Hazel's needle flashed in the lamplight as she secured the last stitch. Looking at the mended shirt in her lap, she realized that perhaps some tears could be fixed after all, not just in cloth, but in hearts too. Beside her, Aiden tested the repaired sole of her shoe, his dedication to the task speaking louder than words about the man he was becoming. Outside, snow continued to fall, but inside the cabin, warmth bloomed like the first flowers of spring, nurtured by shared work and tender moments that neither had expected to find. A week of shared work had settled into comfortable routine between Hazel and Aiden. The winter morning dawned crisp and clear as they went about their chores, the frozen ground crunching beneath their boots. Everything seemed ordinary until old Jake, their usually docile mule, decided today was the day for rebellion. The troublesome animal had somehow worked the gate latch loose and now stood in the yard. Ears forward, looking mighty pleased with himself, Hazel spotted him first through the kitchen window. "Aiden," she called, already reaching for her shawl. Old Jake's loose again. They converged on the yard from different directions, trying to herd the mule back toward his pen. Old Jake, however, had other ideas. He danced away from their reaching hands, switching his tail and tossing his head as if enjoying the game. "You ornery creature," Hazel muttered, making another grab for his lead rope. The mule sidestepped neatly, leaving her grasping air. Aiden circled wide, attempting to guide old Jake toward the gate. "Easy there, fellow," he coaxed, voice low and steady. The mule flicked an ear in his direction, then promptly turned the other way. What happened next caught them both by surprise. Old Jake, apparently feeling frisky in the cold air, kicked up his heels and took off at a trot right through Hazel's neat row of drying sheets. The laundry came down in a tangle, and Hazel let out a most un-Amish-like yelp of dismay. But then something remarkable happened. A snort escaped her lips, followed by a giggle. The sight of their dignified mule prancing around with a sheet trailing from his tail like a ghost was simply too much. The giggle grew into full-throated laughter, the kind that bubbles up from deep inside and can't be contained. Aiden stared at her for a moment, then joined in, his deep chuckle mixing with her lighter tones. Together, they corralled the unrepentant mule, working in tandem between fits of laughter. When they finally got old Jake secured in his pen, Hazel realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that. Years, maybe. The thought sobered her slightly, but left a warm glow in her chest. Evening brought another visitor. Nantan's quiet knock came as Hazel was setting soup to warm and Aiden mended harness by the fire. The Apache man's face was serious as he accepted a seat at their table. "News from town," Nantan said, warming his hands around the cup of coffee Hazel offered. "The county clerk, he takes money from the railroad men. Many papers go missing in his office." His dark eyes held warning. "If you find your father's deed, guard it well." Hazel's hand trembled slightly as she set down the coffee pot. "How can they do such things?" she whispered. "It isn't right." "The railroad believes in gold, not justice," Nantan replied simply. "But you have friends who believe in both." He touched his chest in a gesture of solidarity. They spoke a while longer of careful plans and watchful eyes. When Nantan finally rose to leave, he clasped Aiden's shoulder. "You choose peace now," he said. "This is good. But remember, sometimes protecting what's right requires great strength." After their friend departed, Hazel and Aiden settled before the fire. The flames painted dancing shadows on the walls as they sat close enough for their shoulders to touch. The contact was slight but comfortable, like they'd found their proper places beside each other. Hazel began to sing softly, an old hymn about finding shelter in storms. Her voice carried the German words her mother had taught her, sweet and clear. In the quiet room, Aiden closed his eyes, letting the gentle notes wash over him. The tension he'd carried since hearing about the corrupt clerk began to ease. Here, in this moment, with Hazel's song filling the air and her warm presence beside him, Aiden felt something he hadn't known in years. Peace. Real, soul-deep peace. The kind that made him believe maybe God hadn't finished with him after all. Hazel's song drifted to an end. A tea neither moved to break the spell. The fire crackled softly, and outside an owl called into the night. Something had shifted between them, growing stronger day by day. It wasn't the fierce passion of dime store novels or the formal courtesy of their Amish community. Instead, it was something quieter and deeper, a tender affection built of shared work. Gentle words and moments like this. Hazel felt it too. This warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. she found herself thinking less about what others saw when they looked at her, and more about how Aiden saw her as someone worthy of protection, of kindness, of respect. The thought made her cheeks flush. But she didn't move away from his solid presence beside her. They sat together as the fire burned low, comfortable in their shared silence, while outside the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance. Thunder rolled across the valley as Hazel worked by lamplight, organizing the last few crates of her father's belongings. The wind howled outside, rattling the cabin's windows and making the flames dance in the stone fireplace. She had searched these boxes before, but something urged her to look one final time. Her fingers brushed against a worn leather cover in the bottom of a crate she'd somehow overlooked. Another hymn book. Her heart shouldn't have quickened. They'd already searched dozens without success. But this one felt different. It was her mother's old songbook, the one with the faded blue ribbon marker. Lightning flashed, illuminating the cabin's interior as Hazel carefully opened the fragile book. The spine crackled, stiff from years of disuse. She turned the pages slowly, memories of her mother's voice singing these old German hymns filling her mind. Halfway through, between the pages of Gott ist die Liebe, she saw it. Her hands trembled as she lifted out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age but still intact. Carefully, she opened the creases, her breath catching in her throat as she recognized her father's careful handwriting at the top. This deed certifies. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Aiden. Her voice came out as a choked whisper at first, then louder. Aiden. She heard his heavy boots on the porch. Then the door burst open, bringing a gust of wild air. Hazel, what's wrong? His hand instinctively went to his hip where his gun used to rest, before remembering he no longer carried one. Look, she held up the paper with shaking hands. In Mom's old hymn book, the deed. Aiden crossed the room in 3 long strides. He took the document gently, his weathered fingers careful not to tear the delicate paper. His eyes scanned the text, widening, as he realized what they'd found. This is it, he breathed. This proves your father owned the land, free and clear. Joy bubbled up in Hazel's chest, bursting forth in a laugh that was half sob. Without thinking, she threw her arms around Aiden's waist. He stiffened for just a moment, then did something he'd never done before. He hugged her back. His strong arms lifted her clear off her feet in an embrace that spoke of shared triumph and relief when he set her down. They both stepped back, suddenly shy at the unexpected display of emotion. But Hazel couldn't stop smiling, and she saw an answering light in Aiden's usually solemn eyes. We'll ride to town first light, he said, carefully folding the precious document. Get this recorded proper at the courthouse before anyone knows we found it. Hazel nodded, then glanced at the window where rain lashed against the glass. If the storm passes. Rain or shine, Aiden said firmly. This is too important to wait. They sat together at the table, planning their journey while the storm raged outside. They would need to be careful. Nantan's warning about the corrupt clerk weighed heavy on their minds. But tonight, hope burned brighter than fear. We should pray, Hazel said softly. Give thanks. Aiden nodded, and they bowed their heads together. Hazel's clear voice rose above the storm, offering gratitude in the Pennsylvania Dutch of her childhood. When she finished, Aiden added his own simple words of thanks for the deed, for guidance, and, so quietly she almost missed it, for her, the lamp burned low as they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the storm. Thunder still rolled across the valley, but it seemed less threatening now. Inside the cabin, warmth and hope pushed back the darkness. The deed lay between them on the table, a simple piece of paper that meant everything: home, security, future. Hazel found herself watching Aiden's face in the lamplight. The hard lines of his jaw had softened, and something like peace rested in his expression. She remembered their first awkward meeting, how she'd feared this arranged marriage would be just another burden to bear. Instead, here they sat, partners, in a fight to save her father's land, their hearts beating with shared purpose and joy. Lightning flashed again, but Hazel didn't flinch. There was nothing to fear anymore. Not the storm, not the railroad men, not the future. God had answered their prayers in His own time. And somehow she knew that whatever challenges tomorrow brought, they would face them together. Dawn painted the eastern sky in streaks of pink and gold as the last clouds from the night storm rolled away. Fresh snow blanketed the landscape, untouched except for rabbit tracks that zigzagged between fence posts. The air was crisp and clean. Holding the promise of a perfect winter morning, Aiden worked quickly in the barn, hitching their sturdest horse to the sleigh while Hazel tucked the precious deeds safely inside her heavy wool coat. Her heart fluttered with each crinkle of the paper against her chest. After so many months of uncertainty, here was their proof, nestled close to her heart. "Ready?" Aiden asked, helping her onto the sleigh's wooden seat. His strong hands steadied her, gentle despite their roughness. He tucked a thick quilt around her legs, making sure she was warm before climbing up beside her. The sleigh runners cut smooth tracks through the fresh powder as they glided toward town. Hazel's breath clouded in the morning air, mixing with the horse's steamy snorts. The familiar weight of Aiden's shoulder pressed against hers as they swayed together with the sleigh's motion. As they approached the town, early risers paused to watch them pass. Hazel felt their stares but held her head high. Today was different. Today she carried truth in her pocket and hope in her heart. The courthouse stood tall and imposing at the end of Main Street, its red brick walls catching the morning sun. Aiden tied the horse at the hitching post while Hazel gathered her courage. Together, they climbed the worn wooden steps to the heavy double doors inside. The clerk's office smelled of dust and old paper. The young clerk looked up from his desk, his expression shifting from boredom to poorly concealed interest as he recognized them. Hazel approached his desk, her steps steady despite her racing heart. "We have come to record a deed," she said, her voice clear and strong in the quiet room. She withdrew the document from her coat and smoothed it. Carefully on the desk's surface, the clerk's eyes narrowed as he examined the paper. His fingers traced the signatures, held the page up to the light, and checked the seal with exaggerated care. Hazel could see him searching for any flaw, any reason to reject it. Finally, he cleared his throat. "This appears to be in order." The words seemed to pain him. "I will record it in the county book." Hazel watched as he copied the details into the massive leather-bound volume, each scratch of his pen affirming her family's rightful claim to the land. When he finished, he handed the original deed back to her with obvious reluctance. "Your property is now officially recorded," he said stiffly. "Good day." Walking out of the courthouse, Hazel felt inches taller. The weight of uncertainty that had pressed down on her shoulders for so long lifted with each step. She heard the whispers of townspeople on the street, but their words held no power over her now. "Wait here," Aiden said as they reached the sleigh. "I need to fetch something from the mercantile." Hazel stood in the morning sunshine, watching him disappear into the store. When he emerged, he carried a package wrapped in brown paper. "For you," he said softly. Placing it in her hands, Hazel unwrapped the paper to reveal a bolt of the finest blue fabric she had ever seen. The color reminded her of summer skies and cornflowers. Her fingers trembled as they traced the soft material. "Aiden, I cannot accept you deserve beautiful things," he said firmly. "Just like you deserve to hold your head high in this town." Ride home was quiet, but it was a peaceful silence filled with unspoken understanding. The sun climbed higher, making the snow sparkle like scattered diamonds across the fields. Hazel held the bolt of fabric in her lap, occasionally running her fingers across its smooth surface. That evening, after the chores were done and supper was cleared away, Hazel sat by the fire, overwhelmed by the day's events. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but these were different from the bitter tears she had shed so many times before. These were tears of joy, of relief, of gratitude. Aiden knelt beside her chair. Without a word, he reached up and brushed away a tear with his calloused thumb. His touch was as gentle as morning light on new snow. Hazel leaned into his hand, letting herself feel the tenderness of the moment. "Thank you," she whispered, though the words seemed too small to hold all she felt. His eyes met hers, warm and steady as the hearth fire. In them she saw not the feared gunslinger of his past, but the man who had become her protector, her partner. And perhaps something more. Late February brought softer winds and longer days. Inside the snug cabin, Hazel sat by the window, letting the pale winter sunlight guide her needle through the blue fabric Aiden had given her. The material flowed like water through her fingers as she carefully stitched each seam. She had saved this task for sunny afternoons, wanting to see how the fabric caught the light, shimmering like the creek in springtime. Outside, the steady rhythm of Aiden's hammer rang through the crisp air. The barn's west wall had weakened over the years, and he was determined to strengthen it before spring storms arrived. Hazel paused in her sewing to watch him work, admiring how he measured twice before each cut, how he checked each board for strength. His careful attention reminded her of how he treated her with gentleness and respect. "Aiden," she called through the open window, "would you like some fresh bread? It's just out of the oven." He looked up, wiping his brow despite the cool air. "Much obliged," he said, his smile warming his weathered face. Inside, as Hazel cut thick slices of bread and spread them with fresh butter, she caught herself humming. The sound of her own happiness startled her. When had laughter become so natural again? When had this cabin transformed from a place of loneliness into a home filled with warmth? Aiden stamped the snow from his boots before entering. "Wall's coming along fine," he said, accepting the bread with grateful hands. "Should hold steady for years to come." "Just like us," Hazel said softly, then blushed at her own boldness. But Aiden's eyes crinkled with pleasure. "Just like us," he agreed, reaching for her hand. Later that afternoon, as shadows lengthened across the snow, they heard the familiar sound of hoofbeats approaching. Nantan appeared on his paint horse, carrying a sack of dried herbs and early maple syrup he had collected. "The sap runs early this year," he said as he dismounted. "The earth wakes soon." Hazel welcomed him inside, where the cabin still smelled of fresh bread and the stew she had simmering on the stove. As she served them bowls of the rich broth, Nantan spoke of signs he had seen in the woods, the return of early birds, the swelling of tree buds. "Time to think of planting," he said, accepting a second helping. "The winter wheat you put in before the snow should show green shoots soon." Aiden nodded. "We've been talking about expanding the vegetable plot come spring. Maybe add another field for corn." "My people will help with the planting," Nantan offered, "as neighbors should." Hazel's heart swelled at the word neighbors. She had spent so many years feeling like an outsider, even among her own people. Now, sitting at her table were two men who had become family in their own way. Aiden, who had brought love back into her life, and Nantan, who had helped them save their land. As the men discussed crop rotation and soil preparation, Hazel's hand drifted to her middle. She hadn't spoken of it yet, not even to Aiden, but she felt changes in her body. The morning sickness she had experienced last week wasn't from bad milk. She was sure of it now. Soon, she thought, she would tell him. Soon, this cabin would ring with more than just their laughter. The evening passed pleasantly, with Nantan sharing stories of his grandmother's wisdom about the land. When he spoke of how she could read weather in the way smoke rose from a fire, Hazel found herself laughing at his impression of the old woman's stern predictions. She was never wrong, Nantan said, smiling. Not about weather, not about people. After Nantan left, Hazel and Aiden sat by the fire, sharing the comfortable silence they had grown into. She worked on her dress while he whittled a new handle for her favorite cooking spoon. The firelight caught the blue fabric, making it glow like deep water. "That's going to be a fine dress," Aiden said, watching her careful stitches. "It already is," Hazel replied, running her hand over the smooth seams. "I never thought I'd own something so beautiful." "You deserve beautiful things," Aiden said, just as he had that day in town. But this time, his voice held something more. A tenderness that made Hazel's heart skip. She looked around their cabin at the neat stack of firewood by the hearth. The herbs drying from the rafters, the quilts she had made brightening the walls. Everything spoke of care, of permanence, of home. Even the evening shadows seemed to dance with joy against the walls in town. Unknown to them, the railroad foreman paced the floor of the county clerk's office, his face red with fury. The clerk listened nervously as the man ranted about lost profits and timetables thrown into chaos. Together, they bent their heads over maps and documents, searching for new ways to claim the land they coveted. But in the cabin, Hazel and Aiden remained wrapped in their peaceful evening, unaware of the gathering storm. Their laughter mingled with the crackling of the fire, the soft whisper of fabric, and the quiet sounds of a home filled with love. The March wind howled across the prairie, driving needles of snow against the cabin walls. Hazel stood at the window, watching Nantan's horse appear through the swirling white. His unexpected arrival in such weather meant news, and from his rigid posture as he dismounted, she knew it wasn't good. Aiden opened the door before Nantan. Canuck, ushering him inside where the fire's warmth fought back the bitter cold. Snow fell from Nantan's shoulders as he stamped his boots clean. "I came as soon as I heard," Nantan said, accepting the cup of hot coffee Hazel offered. "The railroad foreman visited the clerk's office yesterday. Money changed hands." He paused, his dark eyes grave. "This morning, the clerk announced he found problems with your deed. He claims it invalid." The cup in Hazel's hands trembled. All their joy, their plans for spring planting, their dreams of family, all threatened by men's greed. She set down her coffee and reached for her heavy wool shawl. "Where are you going?" Aiden asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "To town." Hazel wrapped the shawl tight around her shoulders. "I won't let them steal what's rightfully ours." Aiden stepped between her and the door. "The storm's getting worse. Wait until it passes. Every hour we wait gives them more time to forge papers against us." Hazel's voice held steel beneath its softness. "I won't lose my father's land to thieves." "Then I'll go," Aiden offered, reaching for his coat. But Hazel shook her head. "The clerk needs to see that I'm not afraid, that I won't be bullied off my land just because I'm a woman." She touched Aiden's arm gently. "Your strength is in staying peaceful. Mine is in standing firm." Nantan nodded slowly. "She speaks truth, friend. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the most power." Aiden's jaw clenched, but he stepped aside. "At least let me hitch the sleigh." "No," Hazel said. "The horse might founder in these drifts. I'll walk." She saw the fear in Aiden's eyes and managed to smile. "I'll be fine. The town's not far." The bitter wind stole her breath as soon as she stepped outside. Snow had already filled her tracks by the time she reached the road. Each step required effort, pushing through deepening drifts, leaning into the wind that tried to force her back. Her boots, though sturdy, couldn't keep out all the wet and cold. The normally 30-minute walk stretched into an hour. By the time Hazel reached the courthouse, her skirts were soaked to the knee, and she couldn't feel her feet. But determination drove her up the steps and through the heavy doors. The clerk looked up from his desk, his smooth face showing only mild surprise. "Mrs. Keating, certainly not weather for social calls. You know why I'm here." Hazel's voice shook, but not from fear. "That deed was valid last month. Your office recorded it." "Yes, well?" The clerk shuffled papers on his desk. Further examination revealed concerning irregularities. "The railroad's claim appears to predate your father's purchase." "That's a lie." Hazel stepped closer, her wet skirts dripping on his polished floor. "You took their money to cheat us? To steal land that's been in my family for 20 years. Clerk's professional mask slipped, showing a flash of anger. "Be careful with such accusations, madam. The law, the law." Heat rushed to Hazel's face, though her bones felt ice cold. "The law says that deed is mine." "You're the one twisting the room," suddenly tilted. She reached for the desk to steady herself, but her fingers couldn't find it. The last thing Hazel heard was the clerk calling for help as the floor rose up to meet her. She drifted in and out of awareness. Voices argued above her. Strong arms lifted her. Wind and snow struck her face. Then warmth, movement, the creak of a sleigh. "Hang on." Aiden's voice seemed to come from far away. Almost home, fever burned through her body by nightfall. Aiden knelt beside their bed, pressing cool cloths to her forehead, his hands gentle but trembling with barely contained rage. Each time Hazel's eyes fluttered open, she found him there, his face carved with worry in the lamplight. "Should have stopped." "You," he whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was truly hearing him or dreaming. "Should have protected you better." Through the haze of fever, Hazel felt his calloused hand holding hers. She wanted to tell him that he had protected her by letting her stand up for herself, by respecting her choice to fight. But the words wouldn't come. She could only squeeze his fingers weakly as another wave of chills racked her body. Aiden knelt there through the night, caught between helplessness and fury. Every time Hazel shivered, his hands clenched until his knuckles went white. But he wouldn't leave her side, not even to pace away his anger. He had promised to be her anchor, and he would keep that promise, even as fear for her life warred with his rage at the men who had driven her to this. Outside, the storm raged on, its fury matching the turmoil in Aiden's heart as he watched over his wife's fevered sleep, praying for the strength to remain peaceful when every instinct screamed for vengeance. For 3 days, Hazel burned with fever while winter winds rattled the cabin windows. She lay still as death in their bed, her face pale against the quilts, lips moving in fragmented prayers. Sometimes she called for her father. Other times she begged the railroad men not to take her land. Each whispered plea tore at Aiden's heart. He barely slept, keeping cold compresses on her forehead and spooning water between her cracked lips. When exhaustion forced his eyes closed, nightmares of her funeral jolted him awake. The thought of losing her now, when they had only just found love, drove him to dark places. In the corners of the cabin hung his old life, the place where gun belts once crossed his hips, the familiar weight of revolvers that had brought swift justice, or what he had once called justice. His fingers itched to feel cold steel again. To make the railroad men and that crooked clerk pay for what they had done to Hazel. On the 4th morning, as pale sunlight crept through, frost-covered windows, Nantan appeared at their door. He carried herbs for tea and wisdom in his eyes. "I see the shadow on your spirit, friend," Nantan said, watching Aiden pace like a caged wolf. "You think about the guns you left behind." Aiden's jaw clenched. "They deserve punishment for this, perhaps." Nantan measured dried leaves into a cup. "But what does she deserve? The shame of a husband who chooses revenge over peace. The burden of knowing you broke your vows to God because of her." The words struck Aiden like physical blows. He slumped into a chair, head in his hands. I feel so helpless. What good is my strength if I can't protect her? True strength isn't in the trigger finger. Nantan poured steaming water over the herbs. It's in the hands that tend the sick, the heart that chooses mercy, the spirit that trusts in higher justice than man's. Aiden looked at Hazel's still form, remembering how she had faced the clerk without violence, how she had believed in him when others saw only his violent past. The thought of disappointing her faith in him hurt worse than any bullet wound. He fell to his knees beside the bed, clasping Hazel's limp hand. "Please, Lord," he prayed, voice rough with unshed tears. "Not revenge, just heal her. Let her live. I'll spend every day proving worthy of her trust." Through the long hours that followed, Aiden kept his vigil. He bathed Hazel's face, sang the hymns she loved, and prayed without ceasing. Nantan stayed nearby, brewing his healing tea and offering silent support. Near sunset, on the 5th day, Hazel's fingers twitched in Aiden's grasp. Her eyes fluttered open, clear for the first time in days. Though weak as a newborn lamb, she managed to focus on his face. "Aiden?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Tears spilled down his cheeks, dropping onto their joined hands. "I'm here, love, right here. Don't cry." She tried to squeeze his fingers. "I'm not going anywhere." Aiden pressed his lips to her palm, tasting salt. "Neither am I. Whatever comes, railroad, storm, or devil himself, I'll never leave your side. That's my solemn vow." Hazel's tired smile lit the cabin brighter than any lamp. Behind them, Nantan nodded in quiet approval. Knowing Aiden had chosen the harder but better path, one of faith, peace, and abiding love, as February melted into March. Hazel's strength returned like sap rising in maple trees. Color bloomed in her cheeks, and her appetite returned, much to Aiden's relief. He watched her carefully, heart swelling each time she managed another task on her own. Word reached them that Bishop Lapp and the elders had gathered to address the land dispute. On a crisp morning, their black buggies formed a solemn procession into town. Harness bells chiming like church music against the quiet dot in the courthouse. Bishop Lapp's stern voice carried authority as he presented documentation showing how Hazel's father had purchased the land years before the railroad's western expansion. The other elders stood like weathered oak trees beside him, their presence commanding respect even from the usually dismissive townsfolk. "This family's claim is just and true," Bishop Lapp declared, fixing the judge with an unwavering stare. "We will not stand idle while corrupt men steal from the widow and the faithful." The railroad foreman shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the judge studied the evidence. Even the clerk who had accepted bribes couldn't meet the bishop's eyes. The weight of moral authority filled the room like summer heat. After what felt like hours, the judge cleared his throat. "Having reviewed all documents and testimony, I find in favor of Mrs. Keating. The land remains rightfully hers." Murmurs rippled through the courthouse. Hazel, seated beside Aiden, gripped his hand so tight her knuckles went white. She noticed how people looked at her differently now, not with mockery, but with something like admiration. That evening, as sunset painted their cabin windows gold, the enormity of their victory finally broke over Hazel. She pressed her face into Aiden's chest, tears soaking his shirt. His arms encircled her, strong and gentle. "I never thought anyone would fight for me like this," she whispered. Aiden's voice rumbled deep in his chest. "When the bishop first ordered our marriage, I thought it was punishment for my past. But now I see you're God's gift to me, Hazel. Your strength, your faith." He tilted her chin up, meeting her eyes. "Your love has made me a better man than I ever dreamed possible." Fresh tears spilled down Hazel's cheeks, but her smile glowed brighter than the evening star. What had begun as duty ordered by the bishop had bloomed into something precious and pure, a love born of shared struggles and unwavering faith. The hard winter released its grip as March yielded to April's gentle touch. Ice-locked streams broke free, their waters singing between thawing banks. Fresh green shoots pushed through dark soil in the fields, reaching toward warming sunlight. Aiden worked from sunrise to sunset, his strong hands preparing the earth for planting. He scattered early pea seeds and set out onion starts, marking straight rows with twine. The soil felt alive beneath his fingers, rich with promise, like their love. Inside their snug cabin, Hazel's needle flashed in lamplight as she pieced together quilts. Her strength grew with each passing day. The fabric squares told their story, blue like the dress Aiden had given her, brown like his steady eyes, cream like hope itself. Neighbors who had once turned away now stopped by with warm bread and warmer smiles. Even Mrs. Yoder, who had whispered cruel words about Hazel's size, brought seedling tomatoes and peas. Each visitor marveled at the change in the couple, how love had transformed duty into joy. Nanten visited one morning, his eyes crinkling. With friendship, the earth wakes hungry for seed, he said, promising to help when planting time came. Your children will grow strong in this good soil. The next dawn, as birds called welcome to the sun, Hazel felt it, the first flutter of new life within her womb. Her eyes filled with wonder as she pressed Aiden's work-roughened hand against her middle. Our son, she whispered, remembering Bishop Lapp's stern command that had once brought such shame. Now those words rang with the beauty of prophecy fulfilled. That evening they stood together outside their cabin door. Aiden's arms encircled Hazel from behind, his chin resting on her head as the setting sun painted the western sky in glory. Our boy will know only love here, Aiden murmured. God has given you us all second chances, you, me, this land. Our son will grow up knowing faith can move mountains. Hazel leaned back against his chest, her smile as bright as the golden horizon. Tomorrow beckoned with endless possibility, and her heart was ready to embrace it all. Thanks for watching. Stories like this shape us in ways we don't always expect. If something resonated, subscribe. I'm back tomorrow with another one worth hearing.